Unsurprisingly, not everyone's comfortable with this idea. Orwell's characterization of Miller as cut off from political purpose has been strenuously questioned, rather persuasively in my estimation, by Kate Millet's Sexual Politics, that's 1969. A less convincing but high-profile example would be Salman Rushdie's 1984 essay, Outside the Whale, in which he dismisses Miller as a happy pornographer and accuses Orwell, as E.P. Thompson had done a generation earlier, of quietism. And as the play on words suggests, Rushdie argues that it's in the heavy weather outside the whale that the artist belongs. This surely oversimplifies Orwell's position, because Orwell is speaking about creating art that was not emotionally spurious in the face of coming totalitarianism. Moreover, unlike Miller, Orwell was an energetic partisan of action on other fronts. Although he was initially against what he saw as an imperialist war, as shown most markedly in his letters to Herbert Reed and in his 39 review, Not Counting Niggers, by August, at the same time that he was collecting anti-Hitler jokes from the official organ of the Scientific Poultry Breeders Association, a publication called Eggs, he broke with his ILP anti-militarist stance and afterwards did his best to join the war effort, despite his age and dodgy health. Rushdie, for his part, later conceded in his 91 introduction to Imaginary Homelands that perhaps he had been unfair to Orwell, and though he doesn't explain his change in opinion, it's easy to speculate that the 1989 Fatwa Declaration might have affected his thinking. Since '89, Rushdie has been intimately confronted with a threatening, shrinking world more like the one that Orwell had described. Writing from inside the whale is not really a divorce of the artist from history, but rather a humbling recognition of the artist's limitations. Lastly, for today's readers who actually bother to return to Miller's Tropic of Cancer and Black Spring, Orwell's characterization of the author as politically disengaged will come as a surprise when they encounter Miller's anti-Semitic diatribes, which serve as a reminder of the sheer poisonousness of the political atmosphere of the 1930s. As for the unnecessary detail, it survives because of its modesty, which is also curiously the source of its power. Of course, a person's understanding of the necessary or the unnecessary remains a coded and complicated affair. Terry Eagleton and others have a valid point when they question Orwell's sometimes exaggerated or selectively convenient empiricism, which can lead to a dubious epistemology. Moreover, unnecessary in the manner Orwell defends is not synonymous with dispensable. It cannot be reduced to a reader response recipe or to a game of cute paradoxes. If the extra or unnecessary detail in any way resembles a deconstruction of Sequoia, an idea that Orwell would probably find repulsive, it is obvious that for Orwell it was construed as undermining systems in a positive way. Positive, of course, according to his values. There's nothing nihilistic about it. The critic James Wood has an interesting formulation about fiction having a margin of surplus, and he illustrates it, in fact, with an example from Orwell's A Hanging, the literal truth of which can be questioned. In this sketch, there's a famous description of how a condemned prisoner steps around the puddle on his way to the gallows. It's important for him to keep his shoes clean. Wood claims that the literary interest of this detail is more than a success as a nice bit of verisimilitude. It goes beyond encoding what Colin Barthes described as the reality effect. For Wood, fictional reality is indeed made up of such effects, but realism can be an effect and still be true. It's Barthes' sensitive murderous hostility to realism that insists on this false division. Fictional effects are not merely conventionally irrelevant or formally arbitrary, but have something to tell us about the irrelevance of reality itself. Life, then, will always contain an inevitable surplus, a margin of the gratuitous, a realm in which there is always more than we need. The margin of surplus itself feels like life, feels in some curious way like being alive. Thus, what has no purpose serves, it seems, a very necessary purpose. In 1984, Winston Smith prizes his glass paperweight, which he finds doubly attractive because of its apparent uselessness. In writing, a more perfect consistency of purpose is what distinguishes a pamphlet from literature. Both have their uses, but a thinking individual should be able to distinguish between the two. In a culture, the writer as hippopotamus matters for precisely those qualities that make it possible to compare a writer to the hippopotamus. The last aspect of Orwell's life was spent refining and acting on these ideas that clashed so strongly for him in 1939. After concentrating for much of the war on journalism in his BBC work, Animal Farm, that's 45, brought fiction back into the fray. And in Why I Write, 46, he described an ongoing project since the Spanish War to fuse political and artistic purpose into one whole. Although times have changed since 39, in this essay he still speaks of his affection for useless information, which sounds very much like a species of the unnecessary detail. He alludes to the germination of his next novel, Shirley 1984, which is bound to be a failure. By this he probably means that the fusion of political and artistic purpose will be incomplete. Arguably, though, failure of this order is not only inevitable, but desirable too. Liberal culture was not, as Orwell feared in 1939, destroyed, but it remains fragile, and in 2010 its survival is in no way assured. It contains much of what is unnecessary, even inimical to itself. For the moment, it has escaped the purposeful solutions of the order of Animal Farm, where, one might recall, the more militant chickens quickly came to a bad end. Almost until his dying day, Orwell remained preoccupied with eggs. His last diary entries on the Isle of Jura record production of his crossbred pullets. But he also observed in the Prevention of Literature in 1946, at present we know only that the imagination, like certain wild animals, will not breed in captivity.